My dad kicked me out for rescuing a puppy. What happened next will shock you. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, right in the heart of the Rust Belt, you learn early on that dreams don't always fit into the family business. Around here, it's all about tradition, Friday night football, church on Sundays, and taking over whatever job your parents did before you. My parents ran a modest but respected auto repair shop. The kind of place where grease-stained hands were a badge of honor, and a good day's work meant fixing up another Ford or Chevy for someone in town. My older brother Caleb was the golden child. Tall, broad-shouldered, and built like he was sculpted to be the heir to my father's legacy. At 20, he was already off at a top-tier college on the East Coast, studying business, because, of course, he'd be the one to inherit the shop. My parents had it all planned out: he'd graduate, come back, expand the business, and carry the family name forward. Legacy. That word got thrown around a lot in my house. Then there was me, Aiden. 17, lanky, glasses perpetually sliding down my nose. I didn't care about cars. I barely knew how to change a tire. What I did love? Coding. I spent hours at my beat-up laptop, diving into Python and JavaScript, building small apps, and dreaming of working at a big tech firm. I wanted to be in Silicon Valley, not elbow-deep in engine oil. But in my house, that kind of thinking didn't count for much. Coding's a hobby, not a job, Dad would say, shaking his head whenever he saw me glued to my screen. Mom was no better. She called it my little computer thing. Meanwhile, any mention of Caleb was met with endless praise. His grades, his connections, his bright future. The divide between us became even clearer one night at dinner. Caleb had come home for the weekend, all smiles and arrogance, bragging about his brand new Tesla. Mom and Dad got it for me as an early graduation present, he announced, spinning his key fob on the table like it was nothing. Figured I should get used to driving something nice. I swallowed hard, gripping my fork, already knowing where this was going. Hey, speaking of investments, I started, forcing a casual tone, there's this online coding course I wanted to take. It's just $50, but it'd really help me. Mom cut me off before I could even finish. Aiden, we've talked about this. You need to focus on something practical. Something with a future. I stared at her. Was she serious? Caleb just got a whole Tesla, and I couldn't even get $50 for a class? Sweetheart, Dad added, his tone that patronizing mix of fatherly concern and total dismissal, we just want what's best for you. You should be learning real skills. Real skills. Right. Caleb smirked, not even trying to hide his amusement. Maybe you could code an app to make your own money. The room burst into laughter. I wasn't laughing. I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to stay silent. Getting into an argument wouldn't change anything. That night, I escaped to the garage, the one place I could be alone. The scent of old oil and rust filled the air, a reminder of everything I wanted to leave behind. I paced between tool racks and battered workbenches, my mind racing. Maybe they were right. Maybe coding was a waste of time. Maybe I'd never be more than the family disappointment. Then I saw it. Tucked between stacks of old manuals and half-empty cans of motor oil was a dusty, worn-out book. The Birth of Computing, the title read. I picked it up, wiping off years of grime. Inside, the pages were yellowed, filled with notes scribbled in the margins. Notes in my grandfather's handwriting. I hadn't thought about Grandpa in years. He died when I was 10, but I still remembered how he used to tinker with old computers, the way his eyes would light up whenever he talked about technology. Unlike my parents, he never dismissed my interests. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding. This wasn't just any book. This was his. And he had believed in me when no one else did. I traced my fingers over the faded ink, reading his words carefully. Bits of advice, sketches of circuits, even predictions about how computers would shape the world. The guy had been ahead of his time. I couldn't shake the feeling that this book was meant for me to find. Maybe I wasn't meant to follow the family business. Maybe I wasn't crazy for dreaming bigger. Maybe this book was a sign. I held it tightly, feeling the weight of something bigger than just paper and ink. This wasn't the end of my story. This was just the beginning. The coffee shop was one of those places that never quite made sense. It had the charm of an old roadside diner but insisted on selling overpriced macchiatos like it was a Manhattan boutique. The neon sign outside buzzed weakly, flickering between Javaland and Javala, which made it sound more like a bad travel agency than a place to grab a cup of coffee. But it was the only place in town that paid minimum wage for part-time work, so I was stuck there 4 nights a week, wearing an old hoodie from my high school and listening to customers debate oat versus almond milk like it was a congressional hearing. It was one of those nights, cold, rainy, the kind of miserable weather that made you question why people chose to live in Ohio. The shift was slow, and my mind drifted back to Grandpa's book. I had spent hours reading through his notes, flipping through pages like they held the key to some secret destiny. But real life wasn't a movie. No sudden revelations, no magical success. Just me, my laptop, and a family who thought coding was about as useful as collecting bottle caps. I locked up a little after 11, pulling my hoodie tight against the wind as I stepped outside. The streets were nearly empty, rain turning the cracked pavement into a mirror of streetlights. That's when I saw it, a small bundle of golden fur huddled beneath the greasy old dumpster behind the shop. At first, I thought it was just another stray, the kind that wandered near the alley looking for scraps. But as I got closer, the thing lifted its head, big brown eyes staring up at me with a mix of confusion and hope. A puppy, probably no more than a few months old, soaking wet and shivering like crazy. Definitely not your run-of-the-mill alley mutt. This one had the soft, floppy ears and fancy-looking coat of a purebred Labrador. I crouched down, holding out a hand, and the little guy hesitated before inching forward. He was too cold to be scared. No collar, no tags, just a lost pup left out in the rain. I had fed stray cats before, even snuck a few scraps to dogs that hung around the alley, but this was different. This one wasn't just hungry, he was abandoned. I sighed, shaking my head. "All right, bud, let's get you somewhere warm." It wasn't like I had a plan. I figured I'd take him home, dry him off, and maybe post some flyers in the morning. Someone had to be looking for him, right? Worst case, I'd find a shelter that wouldn't dump him back on the street. The walk home was quick, though the puppy, who I had already started calling Spark, because his little tail twitched like a live wire every time he moved, kept tripping over his own paws. I snuck him inside, careful not to wake anyone, and wrapped him in an old towel. The way he curled up on my bed like it was the best thing he'd ever felt made me feel like I had just won the lottery. Of course, nothing good ever lasted in my house. I had barely settled into my chair, laptop open, when my bedroom door flew open. My dad stood in the doorway, eyes immediately locking onto Spark. The room tensed. I knew that look. It was the same one he gave me when I mentioned coding, or when I didn't want to help at the shop. Disappointment mixed with frustration. "What the heck is that?" I barely had time to react before he stepped forward, grabbing my laptop off the desk. My heart jumped into my throat as he raised it like he was about to smash it. Every piece of my future, every late-night project, every dream I had, it was all in that computer. In one desperate motion, I lunged forward, catching the laptop just before it could meet its doom. My fingers curled around the edges, my pulse pounding in my ears. And then, the most unexpected thing happened. Spark, still curled in the towel, let out a low, rumbling growl. It wasn't loud, but it was enough. My dad hesitated, glaring at the tiny ball of fur that had somehow decided to stand up for me. That moment stretched between us, thick with unspoken words. Then he stepped back, eyes narrowing. "You have 10 minutes to get that thing out of my house," he said, voice colder than the rain outside. "Or maybe you should leave with it." I didn't answer. Didn't move. Just held my laptop close, feeling the weight of my dad's words settle into my bones. 10 minutes. Me or the dog? And for the first time, I wasn't sure if this house was even worth staying in. Walking away from home felt less dramatic than I had imagined. No slow-motion montage, no cinematic downpour soaking me to the bone. Just me, a worn-out backpack, a shivering puppy, and the feeling that I had finally made a decision my dad couldn't undo. The town was quiet at this hour, the kind of eerie stillness that made you wonder if you had just stepped into some alternate reality. No cars, no porch lights still flickering, just the sound of my sneakers scuffing against the damp pavement. I didn't have a plan, exactly. Just a few crumpled bills in my pocket, my laptop slung over my shoulder, and a vague idea of where to go. There was a park a few blocks away, one of those memorial spots with benches dedicated to people nobody really remembered. Grandpa used to take me there when I was a kid, and I figured if I had to crash somewhere, at least it would be on familiar ground. Spark trotted beside me, tail wagging despite the cold. If he had any clue that our grand adventure was actually just me having nowhere else to go, he didn't seem to mind. I envied that about dogs. They didn't care where they were, as long as they were with you. The park wasn't much, some old swings that creaked when the wind hit them, a sad-looking water fountain, and a handful of benches. I picked the one under the giant oak tree, the same spot Grandpa and I used to sit while he told me stories about the early days of computers. I pulled my hoodie tighter, popped in my earbuds, and let some random startup podcast play while I tried to convince myself this wasn't a terrible idea. The night dragged on. The cold settled into my bones, and I realized pretty quickly that park benches weren't designed for actual sleeping. Spark curled up next to me, pressing against my side like a tiny space heater. I whispered to him about how, one day, we'd have our own garage, not for fixing cars, but for building something real. I didn't know what yet. But it had to be something bigger than this. I must have dozed off at some point because the next thing I knew, there was a shadow looming over me. My body tensed before my brain even caught up. The streets were mostly safe, but sleeping outside was an open invitation for trouble. Rough night? I blinked up at the voice. It took me a second to register the face. Mr. Grayson. The old guy who lived a few blocks over. People called him a loner, a weirdo. One of those retirees who kept to himself, walking the same route every day, never saying much. But I always nodded to him on my way to work, and every now and then, I helped carry his groceries when I saw him struggling with the bags. I sat up, rubbing my face. Didn't mean to trespass. Just needed a place to crash. Grayson didn't look mad. If anything, he looked curious. He glanced down at Spark, who was now wide awake and watching him with the kind of wary trust only a dog could pull off. "That your pup?" "Found him outside my work," I said, stretching my arms. "Figured I'd keep him until I find out who he belongs to." Grayson nodded slowly, like he was processing more than just my words. "You been out here all night?" I hesitated. Something about the way he asked made me feel like he already knew the answer. "Yeah." He sighed, then, without asking, took a seat on the bench beside me. "Saw you feeding those stray cats last week," he said after a moment. "Figured you had a soft spot for the ones who don't have a home." I frowned. I didn't think anyone paid attention to stuff like that. Grayson glanced at me, then at Spark. "Look, kid. I've got an extra room in my house. Big place, too big for just me. If you need a place to stay for a while, it's yours. Dog, too." The offer hit me harder than I expected. I had been bracing for a lecture, maybe some pity, but not this. Why? The word slipped out before I could stop it. He shrugged. Because I know what it's like to be alone when you don't want to be. And because it's a heck of a lot warmer than a park bench. I looked at Spark, who was staring at Grayson like he had just offered him a lifetime supply of treats. I wanted to say no, to act like I had this all figured out. But I didn't. And for the first time in a long time, someone was actually offering to help. I met Grayson's gaze, searching for any sign that this was some kind of setup. But all I saw was a tired old man with kind eyes. "All right," I said finally. "Just for a little while." Grayson smiled, standing up and stretching like he hadn't just invited a complete stranger into his home. "Come on then. Let's get you two inside before you freeze to death." I picked up my bag, slinging it over my shoulder. Spark trotted ahead, already acting like this was the best decision of his life. I wasn't sure yet if it was mine. But as I followed Grayson out of the park, I had a feeling that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Grayson's house looked like something straight out of an old western, a low-slung ranch-style place with faded blue shutters and a porch that creaked like it was auditioning for a horror movie. The kind of home that had stories buried in its walls, if only someone bothered to listen. The garage was massive, easily bigger than the one at my dad's shop, and for the first time in a long while, I saw potential instead of another dead end. Spark trotted in like he already owned the place, sniffing every corner while I stood awkwardly in the doorway, backpack still strapped on. Grayson just motioned toward the guest room like it was no big deal. "Make yourself at home," he said. And somehow, I believed him. The first few nights felt weird. Not bad, just different. No slamming doors, no passive-aggressive comments over dinner, no feeling like I was walking on eggshells. Just me, Spark, and Grayson's quiet company. He wasn't the talkative type unless you got him going about something that actually interested him, like computers. Turned out, the guy wasn't just some retired dude with a quiet life. Back in the 70s, he worked at Xerox PARC. That didn't mean much to most people, but to me? That was like meeting a rock star. The place was legendary, early personal computing, graphical interfaces, the stuff that eventually led to what we use today. He had been there, in the thick of it, watching it all happen before the rest of the world even knew what was coming. One night, I found him in the garage, fiddling with an old monitor hooked up to some Frankenstein-looking computer. He had boxes stacked against the wall, discs, manuals, even an original Macintosh mouse. It was like stepping into a time capsule. "You still mess around with this stuff?" I asked, trying not to sound too impressed. Grayson chuckled. "Habit. Hard to let go of the things that made you who you are." That stuck with me. Because for the first time, I wasn't just another kid with a laptop. I was part of something bigger, something connected to the past, to the people who built this world before I even existed. I started using the garage as my own little lab. During the day, I worked shifts at the coffee shop, saving every dollar I could. At night, I was back at the house, tinkering, coding, sketching out ideas for something bigger. A startup. I didn't know what yet, but I knew it had to be something real, something that could get me out of this town for good. Grayson didn't just tolerate it, he helped. He gave me old books, pointed out flaws in my ideas, even threw in a few suggestions of his own. The guy had a mind sharper than most people half his age. One evening, while cleaning up the basement, I found a box shoved into the back of a cabinet. Inside? Old floppy disks. Stacks of them, all labeled in neat, faded handwriting. I grabbed a few and brought them upstairs, curiosity eating at me. Grayson barely looked up from his coffee. "Find something interesting?" "Depends. Did you actually write these?" That got his attention. He took one from my hand, turning it over like it held memories instead of data. "Yeah," he said after a moment. Back when computers still felt like magic. We booted one up. The code was ancient, but solid. Simple, elegant. The kind of stuff that wasn't just functional but built to last. "This is insane," I muttered, scanning through it. "You could have done anything with this." He let out a dry laugh. "Yeah. Could've." It was the first time I saw something close to regret in his eyes. I asked him why he never went further, why he left it all behind. He hesitated before answering, stirring his coffee like he was trying to find the right words. "My son," he finally said. "Wanted me gone. Retirement home, sell the house, cash out and buy a boat. Didn't even try to hide it." I swallowed hard. I had seen my fair share of messed up family dynamics, but that was next level. I told him no, Grayson continued. Figured if he wanted a boat so bad, he could earn it himself. Haven't heard from him since. The air felt heavy. I wasn't great at emotional conversations, but I knew what it was like to be treated like an afterthought by your own family. "I get it," I said finally. "Not the boat part, but the rest." Grayson nodded like he already knew that. "Yeah, kid. I figured you might." That was the night things changed. We weren't just some old guy and a runaway kid anymore. We were two people who had been pushed aside, finding a way to build something new. Spark curled up between us, snoring softly, completely unaware that he had somehow ended up in the middle of an unexpected little family. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel lost. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. A year passed, and somehow, Grayson's house had started to feel like home. Not just a place to crash, but a real home. The kind where you knew exactly which floorboard would creak at night and where the best sunspots were for an afternoon nap. In that year, a lot had changed. The garage had gone from a dusty relic to a full-on workspace. My startup, an online platform designed to help small businesses in town, had started getting traction. What began as a few local coffee shops using my system to track orders had grown into something bigger. I had clients. Real ones. People who trusted me to help keep their businesses running. It was the first time I felt like I was actually building something that mattered. Grayson, meanwhile, had slowed down. He was still sharp, still full of stories and sarcastic comments about how I was just another punk trying to take over the world. But his body wasn't keeping up. He napped more, moved slower, and spent hours watching old VHS tapes of space launches, mumbling about how Apollo 11 was the real American dream. One night, I came home late, exhausted from fixing a bug that had nearly crashed my whole system. The living room light was on, the familiar glow of an old TV flickering against the walls. Grayson was in his chair, just like always, a half-empty cup of coffee on the table beside him. But something was different. He wasn't breathing. Spark must have known before I did. He whined softly, nudging Grayson's leg, but there was no response. I don't remember much of what happened next. Just cold air. The weight in my chest. The realization that I'd lost the only person who had ever really believed in me. The funeral was small. A few neighbors, some old co-workers who hadn't seen him in decades, and me. I didn't know what else to do, so I did what Grayson always did, sat on the park bench and scattered crumbs for the pigeons. He always said they had it figured out. No rent, no taxes, just free meals and open skies. I thought that was it. That was how it ended. Until the lawyer showed up. He was one of those types you only saw in movies, sharp suit, briefcase, a voice that made everything sound like a contract. He handed me an envelope and cleared his throat before reading aloud. Grayson had left everything to me. The house. The garage. His old Chevy that barely ran. And then the number that nearly knocked me flat, $525,000. I was too stunned to process it. That kind of money was unreal. Life-changing. But the real shock came next. A patent. Not just any patent, a forgotten invention Grayson had filed back in the 80s. The lawyer explained that, while it had been sitting dormant for decades, some big tech firm had recently expressed interest in acquiring it. If they went through with the deal, we weren't talking about just a few bucks. We were talking millions. Inside the envelope was a handwritten note. "Kid, you reminded me of who I used to be. Don't waste it. Keep building. Don't let them tell you what you're worth." Gee. I sat there for a long time, staring at the letter, the weight of it sinking in. He had changed his will a month before he died. He had chosen me. I wasn't just some runaway kid anymore. I was the heir to a legacy I never saw coming. And for the first time, I knew exactly what I had to do. I had no interest in blowing through the money. No sports cars, no ridiculous mansions. Grayson had given me something more than cash, he had given me time. Time to build something real. Time to turn the garage into more than just a workspace. Time to take this half-baked startup and turn it into something that mattered. Spark watched me carefully as I paced the garage, reading through the patent details. It was genius, something way ahead of its time, like everything Grayson had ever done. I could take the buyout and be set for life. Or I could finish what he started. I reached down and scratched Spark's ears. "What do you think, bud? You ready for a little risk?" He wagged his tail like he already knew the answer. I grabbed my laptop, opened a fresh document, and started mapping out the future. Because for the first time, the future was actually mine to decide. Quitting the coffee shop felt like shedding an old skin. I had spent enough nights there, pretending the minimum wage grind was some stepping stone to greatness. Now, I had something real to focus on. The startup was growing, the garage was officially my office, and for the first time, I wasn't just a kid with big ideas, I was the guy making them happen. Word about Grayson's inheritance traveled fast. Small towns don't need social media to spread gossip, they have neighbors with nothing better to do. By the time I had set up my second client meeting, the whole block probably knew I wasn't some broke kid anymore. And apparently, that included my parents. They rolled up in Dad's old Ford pickup, the one I wasn't allowed to drive as a teenager because trucks weren't for kids who didn't know a wrench from a keyboard. I was in the garage, half buried in code, when I heard the engine sputter into the driveway. Spark was already growling before I even looked up. They came out like they were in some family sitcom reunion, Mom wearing the same passive-aggressive smile she used when I told her I wanted to study computer science, Dad standing with arms crossed like I still owed him a favor. Look at you. Mom's voice was syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she wanted something. Doing so well for yourself. I wiped my hands on my jeans, watching as Spark strained against his leash. He wasn't a violent dog, but something about their presence had him on edge. Maybe he remembered the night I had to choose between him and staying under their roof. "We heard about your, good fortune," Dad added, his voice trying and failing to sound casual. "Figured we'd stop by, see how you're doing." Mom sighed dramatically. "I mean, we are still family, right? And family takes care of each other. It's the right thing to do." There it was. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I leaned against the workbench, arms crossed. "How much?" Mom blinked, feigning innocence. "Aiden, honey, that's not." Dad cut in. $150,000 should be fair. Spark barked so loudly I thought he'd snap his leash. I shook my head, exhaling through my nose. "So, let me get this straight. The same parents who tossed me out for not following the family tradition are here, standing in my garage, asking for 6 figures like it's a loan from the Bank of Aiden?" Mom rolled her eyes. "Oh, don't be so dramatic. You're doing well. You can afford to help your family. It's not like you earned that money yourself. That one hit harder than I expected. Not like I earned it? I echoed, keeping my voice steady. You think Grayson just handed this to me for fun? Dad sighed, looking at Mom. See, I told you he'd be difficult. That's when I noticed their secret weapon. Standing awkwardly behind them was a guy in an oversized suit, holding a briefcase like it contained the secrets of the universe. He was familiar in that way that made my brain itch, like I'd seen him before but never cared enough to remember where. Mom beamed. This is Greg. He's, from the church. Knows a thing or two about legal stuff. Greg cleared his throat and stepped forward. Now, Aiden, son, let's not make this more difficult than it needs to be. Your parents are just asking for their fair share. Legally speaking. He fumbled with his briefcase, dropping a handful of papers onto the floor. Spark lunged, sending Greg scrambling backward. I stared. Greg, what do you do for a living? He adjusted his tie. I lead Sunday school. I nearly lost it. So, my parents brought their church's volunteer Bible study guy to negotiate a six-figure payout? Mom looked insulted. Greg has experience in these matters. Greg nodded. I once handled a dispute over the church bake sale funds. That was it. That was my limit. I pulled out my phone and hit record. You're asking me for $150,000, using a Sunday school teacher as legal backup. Care to repeat that for the internet? Mom's face went white. Dad muttered something under his breath. Greg looked like he might pass out. You wouldn't, Mom hissed. I raised an eyebrow. Wouldn't I? Greg yelped, grabbing his briefcase. Legally speaking, I think we're done here. Dad turned on his heel without another word. Mom hesitated, opening her mouth like she wanted to say something, but then she saw the red recording light on my screen. She stormed off, slamming the truck door so hard the whole thing rattled. As they pulled out of the driveway, I sighed, putting my phone away. Spark finally settled, sitting at my feet like he had just defended the castle. Good boy, I muttered, scratching behind his ears. I walked back into the garage, shaking my head. Some people never change. And that was fine. Because neither did I. The startup took off faster than I ever expected. Turns out, mixing a TikTok-style interface with a marketplace for local businesses was exactly what small-town entrepreneurs didn't know they needed. I called it MarketSync, an AI-driven platform that analyzed trends, optimized product placement, and helped businesses target customers more effectively. One viral post from an influencer, and suddenly, every coffee shop, thrift store, and indie brand in town was signing up. By the time I pitched at a local tech competition, I wasn't just some kid with a half-baked idea, I was the founder of something real. And when I walked away with a $385,000 grant, it hit me, I had built this. On my own. The news spread fast. Small towns love their local success stories, and for once, I wasn't just that weird tech kid. I was the guy making it happen. Clients were rolling in, I had an actual business account, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't worried about rent. Then came the message. At first, I thought it was spam. Some random notification from Instagram. But when I opened it, my stomach sank. Caleb, yo, bro. Heard about your little business. That's awesome, man. Guess we both got the entrepreneurial spirit. I stared at it, debating whether to leave him on read. But before I could, another message popped up. Caleb, look, I hate to ask, but things are kinda rough at the shop. Business isn't what it used to be. Just need a little help. Like, $50,000? Just a loan. You get it. I put my phone down and laughed. A real, bitter laugh. This was the same brother who never took me seriously. The same guy who got a Tesla while I couldn't even get $50 for a coding course. And now he wanted money? I didn't reply. Instead, I clicked on his profile. And that's when I saw it. Caleb, on a yacht in Miami, drink in hand, surrounded by people who definitely didn't look like struggling mechanics. The caption? Work hard, play harder. I took a screenshot, just in case. Then, after a deep breath, I left a comment under his post, "Sell your Tesla, brother." Within minutes, it blew up. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who had noticed the irony of him begging for cash while partying like a trust fund kid. The replies started rolling in. Big bro got humbled. Maybe skip the bottle service next time. Mechanic shop going under, but yacht trips are a must? Interesting. The internet did its thing. Within hours, his post was getting more attention than he ever wanted. And just like that, the guy who had always looked down on me was the one getting laughed at. He sent another message. This time, a little less cocky. "Caleb, not cool, dude. Family helps family." I typed back, "Oh, now we're family." Didn't seem that way when I needed help. A few minutes later, another text popped up. "Caleb, come on, man. I was just messing around back then. You know I've always looked out for you." I sighed. The audacity was almost impressive. I typed back, "Yeah, and now I'm looking out for you. Financial tip, cut the yacht trips if you're struggling." Then, I blocked him. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like the forgotten brother. I felt like the one who won. The email came late at night, buried between automated alerts and promo spam. At first, I almost ignored it. But then I saw the subject line, "We need to talk, urgent opportunity." It was from a company called Nexera, a tech giant out of the Bay Area. Think Shopify meets Amazon, but with more AI and fewer ethics violations. Apparently, MarketSync had caught their attention. The next day, I was on a flight to San Francisco, barely processing how insane this was. Just a year ago, I was sleeping on a park bench. Now, I was about to sit across from executives who probably spent more on a single lunch than I had in my entire college savings. I didn't dress up for the meeting. Didn't see the point. I showed up in my usual hoodie and jeans, with Spark trotting beside me. If they wanted some Wall Street-looking tech bro, they had the wrong guy. I was here to talk about my company, not play dress-up. Walking into their headquarters felt like stepping into a sci-fi movie. Glass walls, sleek furniture, espresso machines that probably had their own stock portfolios. A receptionist gave me the kind of once-over you'd expect when a guy in sneakers shows up with a dog, but she led me to the conference room anyway. The execs were already waiting, 3 guys in tailored suits and a woman in a blazer that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. They looked surprised. Like they expected someone older, maybe with a LinkedIn page full of corporate jargon. Not some kid and his Labrador. Then they slid a folder across the table. $350 million. I felt my throat go dry. I had imagined a buyout offer, but nothing like this. This was life-changing money. The kind of money that would make headlines. The kind of money that meant I would never have to work another day in my life if I didn't want to. I looked at Spark, who was curled up beside my chair, his tail thumping lazily. He had no idea what was happening, but somehow, he still felt like the only thing grounding me in that moment. "We think MarketSync has the potential to be the future of AI-driven commerce," one of the execs said. "But with our resources, we can take it to a level you can't reach alone." Alone. That word stuck in my head. I had built this from nothing. Every long night, every line of code, every piece of feedback from small business owners who had put their faith in this platform. Was I really ready to hand it over? I stalled, saying I needed time to think. They gave me a deadline, 72 hours. I walked out of the meeting and straight to the beach. I had never been to California before, and something about the waves crashing against the shore made my head feel a little clearer. Spark ran ahead, kicking up sand, completely unaware that his human was in the middle of the biggest decision of his life. That's when my phone rang. It was Professor Langley, one of my old college mentors. The guy who had encouraged me to take coding seriously when no one else did. I hadn't spoken to him in months. "Kid," he said before I could even say hello, "tell me you're not selling." I sighed. "It's a lot of money." "It's not about the money," he shot back. "Do you know what you've built? This isn't just some e-commerce tool. You're on the verge of changing how small businesses compete with giants. If you sell, they'll absorb it, bury it, and keep the status quo." I didn't say anything. I just watched Spark chase the tide, oblivious to the chaos in my head. Langley softened. "Look, I know it's tempting. But you built this because you saw something no one else did. Don't let them convince you that their vision is better than yours." I hung up, my brain spinning. On one hand, selling meant security. No more stress. No more financial worries. I could start something new, free from the grind. But on the other, what if Langley was right? What if this was bigger than just a business deal? I sat in the sand, watching the sun dip lower. Spark flopped down beside me, resting his head on my lap. I scratched behind his ears, thinking about everything Grayson had taught me about legacy. Then I took out my phone and sent a single message to Nexera. "Let's talk." I didn't know what my decision would be just yet. But one thing was clear, this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The deal was done. $350 million in the bank, plus a lifetime stream of royalties from Grandpa's patents. I didn't just sell Market Sync, I kept the part that mattered. The part that would keep paying me long after the ink dried. The moment I got back home, the whole town knew. I mean, it was all over the internet. Small town kid strikes $350 million deal with tech giants. Every diner, gas station, and grocery store I walked into had someone whispering, staring, or straight up asking if I could buy them a boat. I was still processing everything when my phone rang. "Mom's making pie. You home?" I almost laughed. The last time she baked was probably for a church fundraiser. But I already knew what this was. They weren't coming for a casual chat. They were coming because they had lost everything, and I was the only ATM left standing. I waited on the porch, Spark curled at my feet, tail thumping lazily as Dad's old truck sputtered into the driveway. The second they stepped out, I caught the shift. Mom had that nervous energy, the kind that meant she was about to say something she didn't believe. Dad looked tired, like he had aged 10 years in the past one. "Brought you something," Mom said, lifting a pie in a dish I recognized from childhood. She placed it on the porch railing, waiting. "Thought maybe we could sit down, talk things through." I nodded toward the chairs. "Go ahead. Talk." She forced a laugh. "Honey, don't be like that. We're still family." Dad cleared his throat. "You've done well for yourself, son. We're proud of you." That might have meant something if they had ever said it when I was a broke teenager begging for $50 for a coding course. But now? Now it just sounded rehearsed. "So how's the shop?" I asked, already knowing the answer. Silence. Then Mom sighed dramatically, like she was gearing up for a soap opera monologue. "We lost it, Aiden," she admitted, eyes glistening. "The business, the house, everything. Caleb, he tried, but it was just too much. Too much partying. Too much pretending he was a CEO while throwing money at useless ideas. I knew the real story. And now he's in trouble, Dad added, voice strained. Bad trouble. Debt collectors, lawsuits, he's drowning. I leaned back, letting the words hang in the air. So you want me to bail him out? Mom flinched like I had slapped her. Aiden, he's your brother. He needs you. Where was he when I needed him? My voice stayed level, but inside, I felt that old bitterness rise. Where were you? Before she could answer, Dad's phone buzzed. He sighed and put it on speaker. Caleb's voice slurred through the speaker, thick with alcohol. You think you're some kind of genius now, huh? Some big shot? You ruined our family's legacy. You stole what was supposed to be mine. I watched Mom and Dad exchange nervous glances. They hadn't expected him to call, let alone like this. I pulled out my own phone and hit record, just for myself. Just in case I ever needed a reminder of what they really thought of me. Caleb kept ranting, something about how I owed them, how he had been set up to take over Dad's shop his whole life and I had robbed him of his future. As if I had been the one making bad business decisions and hosting yacht parties in Miami. Then Mom did the thing that almost got me. She pulled out an old photo album. Maybe you forgot where you came from, she said, flipping the pages dramatically. Look at us. Look at all the good times. I leaned over, pretending to care. But something stuck out immediately. Page after page, it was mostly Caleb. Caleb at baseball games. Caleb blowing out birthday candles. Caleb with Dad at the shop, learning the trade. Me? I was barely there. A couple of pictures, shoved to the side, like an afterthought. That was all I needed. I stood up, stretched, and nodded toward the driveway. You should go. Mom's face fell. Aiden. No, I said, firm but calm. You're not here because you care. You're here because I made it without you, and now you want a piece. But you didn't believe in me then, and you don't get to benefit from me now. Dad's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Caleb was still yelling through the phone, but I wasn't even listening anymore. I stepped inside, held the door for Spark, and just before shutting it, I said the last thing they'd ever hear from me. Keep the pie. And with that, I closed the door. Spark let out a single bark, almost like he was putting the final period on the conversation. And just like that, I was finally free. Leaving wasn't a tough decision. The town, the whispers, the, hey, big man, let me hold a couple grand, jokes, none of it felt like home anymore. And my parents? They weren't going to stop circling until I was drained dry or long gone. So, I sold the house. The same one that had gone from a place I dreaded to a place I rebuilt. But some places hold too much baggage, and I wasn't about to let my past dictate my future. A few weeks later, Spark and I were standing in front of our new home in Malibu, an eco-friendly house perched on a hill with solar panels, floor-to-ceiling windows, and a deck overlooking the Pacific. It smelled like salt air, fresh beginnings, and the sound of waves drowning out everything I left behind. Spark ran ahead, sniffing every inch of his new kingdom, tail wagging like he had just won the lottery. I dropped my bags, taking it all in. No more small-town gossip. No more ghosts of my past knocking on my door. Just peace. Well, almost. The media wouldn't let up. Every tech outlet, financial blog, and lifestyle magazine wanted a piece of the self-made millionaire story. I did a few interviews, but the moment they started asking about my family drama, I shut it down. The only thing that mattered now was what I built next. And I already had the blueprint. An AI-driven platform designed to protect stray and abandoned animals, something inspired by Spark and every animal I had ever wanted to save when I was just a broke kid sneaking scraps to strays. I called it Paw Guard. The idea was simple: use AI to track, rescue, and rehabilitate lost or abandoned animals, connecting them with shelters, vet clinics, and potential adopters. I wasn't trying to build another billion-dollar empire. I was trying to do something that mattered. And for once, people saw it. Not as a business, but as a movement. Within months, I was on the cover of magazines, speaking at tech summits, and getting messages from celebrities who wanted to fund the project. But the best part? Watching the first AI-assisted rescue happen. Seeing a lost dog reunited with his owner because of something I built. It was better than any paycheck. Then, just when I thought my old life was behind me, my phone buzzed. An unknown number. But I knew exactly who it was. Caleb. I let it ring. 3 times. Then, curiosity got the best of me. "Where the hell have you been?" His voice was slurred, angry. "You think you can just disappear? Just run off to paradise and leave us in the dust?" I almost felt bad for him. Almost. "We're still family. And trust me, you'll pay what you owe. We'll make sure of it." I laughed. A real, genuine laugh. "Not this time, Caleb." And then I blocked his number. I stepped out onto the deck, Spark right beside me, watching the sun dip below the ocean. In the distance, a seagull called, and I felt something shift inside me, like the final door to my past had just closed for good. Then Spark perked up, ears twitching. Down on the beach, half buried in the sand, was a tiny, trembling puppy. I grabbed my drone and launched it into the sky, letting the camera hover as I made my way down. Spark ran ahead, already deciding we had a new member in the family. I scooped up the puppy, holding it close as it nuzzled into my chest, already trusting me. Already safe. This was it. A new chapter. And for the first time, I knew exactly where I was going.